Hello and welcome everyone to the CGSP Briefing. This is our new show that we're doing that we're going to try and keep to just 15 minutes to bring you a download of some or one of the top stories of the day that we cover in our newsletter that goes out to subscribers. Today we're talking mining in Africa, so I had to bring along my good friends Obert, who's our critical minerals editor, and Géraud Neema in Mauritius, who is our Africa editor. A very good afternoon to you, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Eric.
Well, guys, I want to talk today about what's something called Galamsey. Galamsey, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is illegal mining in Ghana. Now, this is a topic that we have talked about for a long time. I mean, going back years, and it flared up anew last week, late last week, after Chinese ambassador to Ghana, Tong Defa, held what can only be described as a very fiery, spicy press conference where he said, basically, don't blame us for Galamsey. Gentlemen, here's what I want to do today. I want to play some of the clips from that ambassador's press conference, and then I want to get your reaction, and then I want to talk about the huge reaction that it generated in Ghana. National TV networks dedicated full-hour broadcast to it. As you can see here, City Newsroom covered it. It was, let me just show you another one here, Joy FM, which is one of the big, they were saying, again, you hired them. Don't blame us for this illegal mining. Let's just kind of cut to the chase now, and let me, show you exactly what he said. And we'll go.
What's the reason why when people say Galamsey, they normally equals that with Chinese, but actually it is not Chinese who, it's the issue is not originated from Chinese. I mean, you can see those mining, Chinese people cannot get the license, cannot get the permit. It's the Ghanaian people who draw Chinese people over here, and some of those people who are even caught red-handed, even though they are caught red-handed, they are just some like migrant workers to come here to make a living. I'm not treated well because they always say, because I have a social media. When I posted X on my social media, then people say, hey, Ambassador Galamsey, it seems, Galamsey is caused by China. So this is unfair to me. Am I correct? This is unfair to me. This is really unfair to me. And unfair to the overwhelming majority of Chinese. They have involved a lot of sectors. You can say, a lot of buildings built by Chinese companies, your roads built by Chinese companies, your port built by Chinese companies. But is any normal Ghanaian people know about this? Or even they know it, they always say Galamsey. They always say Galamsey.
Okay, gentlemen. We don't hear that very often from Chinese diplomats. Géraud, again, we've been covering this for about 10, maybe 12 years. What's your take on Tong Defa's statement that don't blame us for your failings in regulating your own mining sector?
It's just an ambassador who's tired of being China being equated with illegal mining in Ghana. And he's right, because when you look at the Galamsey story, it's not something that's pertaining specific to Chinese. You have Nigerians, you have Ghanaians, you have different people coming from different part of the region that are part of the Galamsey operation in Ghana. But most of the time, people tend to use Galamsey and equate them to China. And I think he was just expressing his frustration with the fact that, why are you equating us to Galamsey where actually we are not part of that, even though there are some Chinese there, and is just tired of that being the case. And the idea is to say, when he says that we are not the one who sent them here, you hired them, you brought them here, you give them job here. It's basically, don't stop blaming the China as a state. Stop blaming China as a state for what you allow that happen in your country. And what people also don't get is basically throwing under the bus its own countrymen by saying, not happy what they do, sanction them, arrest them, do whatever you need to do, but don't to use China as a state to say, we are the one creating the situation here. It's just expressing a frustration that I think that many ambassadors are now expressing, because the reality is those phenomena are quite common around the continent.
So, Géraud, you are from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Obert, you are from Zimbabwe. I want to bring you the reaction of one of the mining executives. Here's Dr. Ken Ashgibe. He's the CEO of the Ghana Chamber of Mines, and he responded very forcefully to Ambassador Tong's comments. He said, quote, "We must not pretend that all foreigners are victims. The data shows that the majority of foreigners arrested for illegal mining in Ghana are Chinese nationals. Some of them would never dare act this way in China." 2 points on that. I don't think his data is correct on the majority, because when you've seen the crackdowns, the majority are Nigerians and other West Africans who have crossed the border. The Chinese are very visible, but the data that we've seen over the years shows that it's actually West African migrants who are crossing over the border to do illegal mining. Some of that would never dare act this way in China. He has not been to China. A lot of bad stuff happens in China. Labor abuses, environmental violations, poaching. They have this vision of China as this authoritarian state where everything is under firm control. No, not true. You hear on, sorry, Géraud, you hear that, they would never treat Chinese workers this way when they have kind of labor exploitation issues in Africa. And you're like, no. Let me be very clear. Obert, step into the debate now. You've heard from the ambassador, you've heard from, the Ghana Chamber of Mines. This is an issue also in Zimbabwe as well.
Yeah, it's an issue that has been seen in Zimbabwe. If I could take you back to, I think, 2023, the Chinese embassy in Zimbabwe also issued a very, strong statement in response to some of the allegations that, Chinese people are, mining illegally. And they expressed, the ambassador said, it should not be a problem for China. You have laws, you have institutions. The institutions within the country should, enforce the law. He sort of like also, was indicting our government for not in doing their job, which is essentially enforcing the environmental regulations. So it's something that is being seen a lot more from the Chinese embassy to say, wait a minute, we want to distance ourselves. I had a conversation with someone from the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission last week. We had a meeting with the embassy of China. They were also sharing a lot more about the impacts of Chinese investments on the human rights side. And the embassy again told them that, you know what, it is not our problem. You are an institution of government that should be enforcing this. You should be telling us that these are the people that we have arrested and we have prosecuted them, and this is what you are doing. If you need our assistance, you can let us know and not blame this on China. So it's an issue of failure by local, institutions, particularly the environmental management authorities, to enforce their laws. So it's not a China problem. And on the issue,
Okay, Obert, I want to pick up on that point very quickly about the question of governance. And this was really the main topic of discussion all weekend on Ghanaian TV and on social media about who is responsible, all these issues that Ambassador Tong brought up. And I want to share now a clip from Joy TV, which is one of the national news networks on cable. And it gives you an example of the type of discussion that was going on. And then I'd like to get both of your reaction.
Well, Prof, could the ambassador's comments also be seen as an attempt to deflect international scrutiny of China? I mean, he could be right that there could be some local support or local collaborators here. However, if you are coming into somebody's country and engaging in illegality, you must pay for what you do or be held responsible for that, is it not?
You're right. But it is not the ambassador's duty to go and arrest his own people who have violated the law. It is those who lead the process and protect them and bring them into the country. An ambassador, for instance, if a Ghanaian is misbehaving in America, you don't expect the Ghanaian ambassador in Washington to be the one to go and look for that Ghanaian who is causing the problem. Will you? No. So once you are in the country, you are in the hands at the mercy of the local legal or law enforcement authorities. You are at the mercy of the local government, the host government in the country. And therefore, I think the ambassador is being very honest. As I said, this is not the first time I've heard him articulating this position. So we must begin, because if you arrest the Chinese, the ambassador is not going to intervene to say, no, why did you arrest my citizen, my fellow citizen? No, you take the person through the legal processes. If it requires deportation, you do so. If it requires imprisonment, you do so. So I think the challenge is really on us as Ghanaians, not on the ambassador.
So, Géraud, this again can apply to the DRC as much as to Ghana, as much as to anywhere in Africa and anywhere in the world, really. It's not up to the Chinese, it's up to the host government.
Yes, just to comment, I wanted to say earlier, when the guy say if something like this happened in China, they would never do that. Yes, they will never do that, because in China you have institution, Chinese police and judicial system that's going to apply the law. Simple as that. You don't want that to happen in Ghana, in DRC, in Mali, in Zimbabwe. Guys, do your job. Arrest them, send them to court, send them to prison. Simple as that. You cannot be deflecting your own responsibility to the embassy of a country to say, you know what, we want you to arrest your people. What do you want them to do? What do you want them to do? They're free citizens. They came from China. They arrived in Ghana. They launched business. You want the Chinese ambassador starting to following them behind and no, come on, do your job. Arrest them. If you're not happy, send them away. I don't know, but do your job. And I totally agree with what he says.
Yeah, but let me play one last statement. And this is something that we hear a lot in these discussions, that the Chinese should actually have their laws applied in Africa. Let me play you a quote from Emmanuela Doreen Coiffé, who is a climate activist and lawyer. And she was speaking at a Wilson Center event. Wilson Center is one of these think tanks, by the way, in Washington that got doged and is closed down now. But they had a great discussion on China and critical mining in Africa. And Obert, I'm going to let you kind of answer this one. So,
Chinese government should extend these kind of laws in their countries to be able to hold Chinese investment accountable. Sometimes we find these Chinese illegal miners, they get arrested, they get deported, and some way, somehow we find them back in our countries again. The popular Aisha Huan case, you can just Google and you see she got deported, and we found her back in Ghana still doing illegal mining, and we're like, how did she come back? Did no one hold her accountable when she went back to China? So these are some of the conversations we need to be having about not just the financial aspect, but how can China ensure that its legal framework, when it comes to some of these issues, just that do not stay in China, but they also extend beyond Chinese borders and hold their, investors accountable.
see, what I find funny about this line of thinking is that the Chinese are accused of being neocolonial, and they're accused of being interventionists, and they're accused of taking over. And yet now they're accused of not exporting their laws into African countries. And can you imagine if Chinese law enforcement were wandering around the countryside of Ghana, and people would lose their minds? I mean, remember when there was these Chinese police in Zambia and in South Africa who were there by the invitation of the local government to help support the policing of the local Chinese community? People lost their minds. How would the Chinese embassy be able to enforce its laws? And by the way, to answer her question, you know, Aisha Huang, who was known as the Galamsey Queen, first of all, got arrested by Ghanaian border authorities when she tried to make it back into the country. So that does show you that law enforcement does matter. But maybe she should have been punished more in Ghana before she was let go and deported back to China. Obert,
what she doesn't say, what she doesn't say before Obert go, she came back with Ghanaian passport, with Ghanaian paperwork. When she was arrested, Ghanaian residence paperwork and Ghanaian.
And that's the other dirty secret here. But remember in our discussion about Galamsey last year when this came up about Aisha Huang, they said the ultimate culprits, and by the way, this is a Ghanaian discourse. They're not foreigners. It's the tribal chiefs who own the land, who are hiring the Chinese, and they know exactly what's going on. Obert, we're going to give you the last word so we get out on time.
I understand where she's coming from. I think this is part of the, discourse in civil society spaces where, people try to say, China should at least have a way for people to access the judiciary in China to hold Chinese companies operating overseas. And when this discourse is had, often you have people comparing with Western laws that have extraterritorial application. For instance, something close to like the Dodd-Frank legislation in the US, where you can hold a company in the US for what they have done outside. So I think that is their thinking, I think, from how she articulated it. But obviously expecting China to export their laws and have institutions outside China holding their, or not their corporates, but Chinese entities accountable. I think that would be, something that is, no government has been able to do that. Let's put it out there, to effectively hold its corporates outside. In the EU, they have these, these corporate sustainability due diligence laws they're trying to come up with. That is part of the discourse that I think influences that thinking that governments should also have a hand to go outside their borders and hold them accountable. But coming back to the Galamsey issue, I think it's more about governance issues that we see not being effectively implemented, institutions being corrupt. You could also argue that there's elite capture of some of these, because if you dig deep to find out who are the kingpins in this illegal, the owners, you find that most of them are aligned with political leaders, or most of them are, don't want to say in bed, but they have a relationship with politicians. The same applies with also even in other countries outside Ghana. So it's a bigger governance issue that without the chain of question, we can't really blame shift and say China should, because much of the influence that we can have is addressing things at home than trying to extend a hand to say we want to hold them accountable in China, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Even in Europe, where they have those frameworks, they're not effective as they would want us to think. They haven't been used in most of the cases that we find. And also, it's very difficult for people to go and follow a Chinese company in Beijing or Shanghai, like what we are seeing with Shell being sold in UK or in Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay, well, that is a great take on that. We wanted to do a deep dive very quickly. Tried to keep it in our 15-minute window for the CGSP briefing. We're going to be doing these a couple times a week, in addition to our podcasts and the roundtable and all the different shows that Géraud, Obert, Cobus, and the rest of the team are doing with us. So for Géraud in Mauritius and Obert in Zimbabwe, I'm Eric Olander. Thank you so much for joining us on the CGSP briefing. We'll see you again right here later this week.